Hey guys, welcome back. It's that time. We're gonna get ready to start painting. But before we can get into the fun part, we've got to do a little bit of elbow grease work first. So we need to resurface prep the holes since they've been sitting for probably like a month or so. That's gonna increase the surface energy, allowing for a good bond between the surface and the gel coat. So that's really important. After we sand it, we're gonna go ahead and clean the entire surface with some acetone to make sure we remove any gunk, any hydrocarbons, the oils from touching it with our hands and everything. So at this point we want, a nice clean area. So from this point on, whenever we touch the boat, we're gonna be doing so with gloves on, so that way we don't transfer any of the oils from our hands. Normal sanding operations, find an area we can see pretty well at, maybe back here. So to surface prep this, it's just gonna be a light scuff and making sure we get everywhere. So you can already see a little bit of transfer, that's all we want. Just a little bit on the surface, so that way we get some nice activation.
So naturally, I choose to do this stuff at the absolute worst time of year. It's currently August whenever I'm doing all this work, so heat's gonna be a recurring issue, and my GoPro actually dies from being too hot. So if some things are missing, it's probably because my GoPro just got way too hot.
So I do need to be careful and watch my leg over here because I am hitting the edge and it's pretty toasty in here. So I'm gonna be watching both my sweat and my legs.
After sanding, we're gonna come through and wipe the boat down with first acetone to remove any potential hydrocarbon contaminants on the surface, and then with IPA, continuously wiping in one direction.
You can see just from that one wipe, we get, quite a bit of dust and stuff that's left behind off. And as you can see, when it dries, there's all of this residue right here that came off the paper towel. So that's why we want to push in one direction. Oops. To get started with the masking, we're going to tape off the bottom of the holes using some plastic sheeting that's already got tape attached. It makes it super simple, and it's about 24 inches long. So we'll run that around the bottom of the holes, and then we'll tape off the pylons just with some normal masking tape. Just some normal masking tape. And then we'll tape off all the metallic structure with just some paper and tape. So we'll get started. So we should all be good with masking now. It's getting pretty late, it's already 8:30, so I'll probably hold off on painting until tomorrow. Before we start mixing everything out, this is just a normal HVLP gravity gun. It has a 2.5 millimeter nozzle on it, and we have an air regulator to make sure that the air at the tool is 40 PSI. As well as an oil and water separator, since my air compressor doesn't have one built in, just to make sure that the air we're getting is nice and clean. So this will allow us to adjust our fan and adjust our material deposit to make sure we get a nice good sized fan that's not laying down material too thick in anywhere. Alright, so I made a little bit of an upgrade. We're going to test it out. So I'm going to be using the disposable cup system, and hopefully this will help me spray a little bit more consistently at all angles. So I think it was like 30 bucks total from Harbor Freight. This is a number 2 female. Just twist right on the top, and then we'll pour the mixed material into this liner, into the cup. I wouldn't use the cup for measuring at all because the liner's not perfect in there. But then we throw this cap on, with the retaining ring and it just pops on the top. It should be a disposable liner, so that way we don't have to deal with cleaning out the cup and everything, although we'll have to figure out how we clean the gun out itself with acetone since we don't have the cup to fill it up with. So we'll take a look and see how that does. But in order to mix, I'm still going to be mixing in these small cups, but it'll allow me to do more because I won't catalyze in here. I'll catalyze when it's in this liner. And we'll be catalyzing at 1.2% MEKP, the same that we've done on all of the bottom of the hole. So based on the math that I'll show on screen, that'll be 9 drops per ounce. This will give us a little bit more work life because it's so hot in here. So let's go ahead and start mixing. We'll have to open up the gel coat first, mix it up a little bit to make sure it is good to go and it's nice and mixed and nothing has settled. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the respirator on now. Safety reasons and all that stuff. Don't wanna be inhaling this crud. So we'll start getting to work on that and we'll see how this new system sprays. These little pour caps are super nice to make sure that when we clean it, it's a lot easier to clean. And this thing actually has a filter screen on the inside. So I need to find a way to get rid of this real quick. We don't want that filter because the gel coat won't pull through it. So we'll remove that before we get started as well. Alright, we're going to keep it consistent at the 50-50 mixture, so we'll do 4 and 8 and then another 4 and 8 for a total of 8 ounces of gel coat. Going to be a lot of material to lay down. It's a little bit more than I thought it was, but we'll see how it goes. This is all the point of experimenting, and then I won't have to mix 12 batches of this stuff. Okay, so we're just mixing those 2 batches that we previously mixed together before we catalyze, just to make sure any mixture differences between the 2 are homogeneous. And then we'll catalyze. So it'll be 9 drops times 8 ounces. So it'll be 72 drops, but we'll do it in batches of 9. And so it is 35, so we have approximately 10 to 15 minutes. So we pop this top on. Make sure it clicks. Back thread. And then tighten up. I'm gonna put my hood on now. Pop the top. We're gonna go in the depressions and then twist to lock it in.
Now that the gel coat is mixed, we have one last step before we're ready to start spraying the boat. We want to ensure that we have the proper settings on the gun, including fan atomization and flow. So we'll test that by setting up on a piece of masking paper or cardboard and adjusting the needle and airflow to ensure that the fan has an elongated oval shape, and I'll put what it should look like up on the screen. You'll notice here that I'm using a gravity gun. I started that way because that's what came with the gun, but it's not forgiving for somebody like me with little spraying experience, especially on the horizontal surface that is the top of the boat. So in the previous mixing, you saw a different disposable type setup. That's what I'd highly recommend. Additionally, since gel coat is catalyzed, it'll cure in the gun. So when I was spraying the top of the boat, in between each batch of mixing material, I had to completely clean the gun out so that way it wouldn't cure in the hopper. My process for spraying the holes was to first spray the horizontal surface, moving at a good rate. I would start off the part and end off the part and quickly move back and forth, overlapping by at least 25% to ensure good coverage. After a large area of the horizontal surface was covered, I came back and touched up the edges. This was especially beneficial when I was using the gravity gun to ensure that the remainder of the material was sprayed. Now once we get to the bottom of the boat, I started to get a good grasp on spraying in general, so we'll discuss further once we take a look at the results for the top spray.
Alright, so it's been a little while since we got the first layer of gel coat down. I want to take a look at a couple of the spots to get you guys a better view of what I'm seeing, and then we'll work on how we fix it. So if you can see in here, there's a lot of composite defects showing through in the gel coat. Some of these, like these guys right here, are normal pits, but something like that is an artifact of a composite defect below, or it could be from the fastener holes we drilled too. So some of these are starting to fill in a little bit better than others because I've done a couple coats on this side now. But you can see a really big composite defect there. So if you guys are gonna spray gel coat, make sure you get the composite defects filled before you go into actually painting, because they show through. And it actually looks like we filled most of the pitting that was in this area pretty well by putting another coat down. Now when we get into the fairing areas, there's quite a bit of pitting in this, but this is all due to porosity in the actual epoxy itself. So one thing we could have done different here is tight wiped after we finished everything. Just a nice hot coat on top and wiped it all clean to fill in all those pits and voids. Now coming to these aft holes, we can see some pretty big divots in this pitting. So since we laid down so much material and it cured, that fluid can't sink back down and fill in where the air was. So it ends up with all these little divots all over. So we're gonna mix up some gel coat, still mix 50-50 with Duratec, and we're actually gonna use a squeegee and just lightly wipe it along the surface in hopes that we can fill these pitted areas. All right, so the gel coat's all mixed up. I'm wearing the respirator still because of the solvents in this thing. They're not nice even if you're not spraying it, so we'll kind of dab it around and then use a spreader to kind of tight wipe it to the surface. So the wiping the material in worked decently. Don't know quite how I feel about it. If anything, I would try that before you spray gel coat, and then just spray a nice good surface over the top. So that would be my recommendation if you're doing this in the future, is if you do have porosity and stuff like that, wipe the gel coat on first. Just a nice thin layer to fill in any porosity, and I think that's probably what I'm going to be doing on the bottom of the hole. And we do have some runs from the spray, so I'm going to use a 320 grit sandpaper. I'm just going to use it dry, and I'm going to sand those out, and then we'll clean the whole boat again and do another spray coat, and hopefully that will be good enough to get us a good surface finish that I'm happy with. So I was pretty happy with that last coat of gel coat on the top of the holes. So I went ahead and flipped the boat yesterday. It took about 4 people, and luckily we were able to clear the garage door opener right here. So we flipped it all inside of this paint booth without having to go outside. So now we'll go ahead and remove all of this masking from the side, and then take a look at the rest of the bottom of the holes to see what all we need to patch up. So as you can see, the bottom has worn through most of the gel coat. This is pretty standard on these beach cats because most people do pull them directly up onto the beach, but looking at it, it doesn't seem too bad. You can see all the marring and the scratching
from just running over rocks, shells, whatever else. So first things first is we're gonna need to sand all of the black marks off and try to get everything nice and smooth, and then we'll tie it back into our previous sanding work as well. So I am gonna go ahead and use the mechanical sander with the vacuum hook on it, the same way we have been doing it. It's gonna make it faster, and the vacuum's gonna help reduce the amount of dust that we get. The booth is on, I'm sure you can hear it. So we should get airflow in one direction. Other than that, we're just gonna have to try and use the vacuum to minimize dust. But regardless, there's gonna be dust, so we may as well be using the vacuum to suck it all up. And then we'll give it plenty of time to air out before we start spraying or anything. All the areas we sanded previously, we're gonna go back over and sand with gray Scotch-Brite to make sure we get a good activated surface energy for some good bonding. We'll follow the same processes after we Scotch-Brite it up. We'll blow it off, wipe it down with acetone, wipe it down with IPA, all with non-woven wipers, and then we'll get into the gel coat. And I think this time, because we have so many more of these fastener holes, we are gonna go through and do a thin, just tight wipe across the surface with the gel coat thin 50/50 with the Duratec. Hopefully that'll help fill any pits and voids, so we'll see how that looks after we get into that. But for now, let's start sanding.
All right, so we're getting ready to wipe the bolt hole down. Once again, we're going to use acetone first to clean off any hand gunk, and then we'll come back through with isopropyl to clean off any acetone residue and anything else that might be there. We're going to do all of this with some non-woven wipers, and that's going to make sure we don't leave anything behind to mitigate any of the pitting that we saw last time, just to make sure that that's not an issue. Well, this is the gross part about doing this out here. It's all sweat. Alright, so I've got some more gel coat mixed up, still thin 50/50. This time we catalyzed at about 1.2%, which is 9 drops for total boat. So we're gonna apply this same thing with the squeegee across all of the areas where we sanded down to the composite or where we applied our fairing material. So we gotta be quick. So this right here is the type of stuff that we're looking for. Just want to fill any sort of like pinhole that may be present.
Spray the bottom, I first started off with a thinner coat than before, pretty much going for a dust type coat. So where we can almost see the material underneath, which you can definitely see in this video here. You can see a lot of the repairs underneath. After the dust coat, I would come back through and spray on a heavier coat, targeting about 5 mils. In between the thicker coats, we'll let it cure completely and sand out any runs. I'm still pretty new to spraying, and so runs are gonna happen, that's part of it. I did do around 2 coats. The thickness looked really good. I wasn't able to see any of the composite underneath. And Quite honestly, the gel coat's expensive. I think I used a half gallon to do all of this work, and that's about $300 between the gel coat and the Duratec, not to include any of the consumables that go along with it.
All right, so the first coat of gel coat is done on the bottom. As you can see, it's still a little bit thin, and that's a product of mixing it 50-50 with the Duratec, is that it makes it a little bit opaque. So you can see through a little bit. To build up that coloring, we need to put at least one more coat on, which I hope is all we need, because that's all the gel coat I have left. So before we do that last gel coat, there's, you know, some defects right here. Some little ones throughout. There's a run right here, so I'm gonna go around the entire boat and clean those up real quick. I'm just using some 320 wet or dry. I just want to get the surface nice and smooth, so that way when we come back through and we spray again, it gets rid of these defects. I will also probably mix up a small batch and try and fill these little pinholes. So the boat is done painted. We flipped it over and put it on the brand new trailer rollers. Really happy with it. There was one issue from keeping it flipped over on the sawhorses for so long. We can see it right there. So it looks like there was just too much weight on the sawhorses and not enough padding. So if you flip your boat over, get something with a little bit more padding than a pool noodle, because it just collapsed under the weight and put a lot of pressure on the boat. But other than that, the boat looks pretty good. It's not perfect by any means. I'd be lying if I said it was. So let's look at some of the issues we're currently seeing in the gel coat. And I mean, all of it is cosmetic, so we won't fix it. But in the future, it's a learning experience for me and hopefully for you guys as well. We can see some blue marks, and this is actually from that masking material, the paper sheeting. And so the paper sheeting actually transferred some of the material on it. So we'll give it an IPA wipe and see if we can't remove some of that. We can see there's another pinhole still. So this is a composite defect. Definitely could have done better filling the composite defects, and it doesn't help that this was the first area that I sprayed. So I think I fixed a lot of these issues in the future. We can see a couple more composite defects showing through, but all in all, I'm pretty happy that most of these filled up. These big pinholes like this are the bigger issue, but there's probably nothing we're gonna do about them. Moving further down, we can see some orange peel on here. It's not too bad, maybe a little bit of dry spray, so this stuff is all gonna stay. When we get into this fairing material, you can see that there are a lot of pinholes. So what I should have done in this fairing area is tight wiped with epoxy to make sure all those pits and voids are filled in. It's not a huge deal, but it's cosmetic. We can see again that transfer from the tape
And then this back area looks pretty good. So all in all, I'm pretty happy. It's a little bit light around the pylons, but I mean, what are you gonna do? There was plenty of gel coat there to begin with. This is just mostly cosmetic and it's gonna be covered up for the most part. So on this same right hole, it looks pretty good. We do have a pretty solid orange peel layer and it's a little bit light, but the color is pretty consistent. So on the right hand hole, there is a major composite defect in here, but it looks like the gel coat filled it up pretty nice. So we're not gonna touch this, but if we need to, we can always fill that in and then recoat it with some additional gel coat, maybe in like a Prevail sprayer or something. The rest of the top looks pretty good. And then one of the other issues on this porthole location is you can see this edge showing through that is, you know, the edge of this not faired out properly and not sanded down. So the gel coat, once you get a shiny surface, it shows, you know, every single defect. So could have done a lot better here, but not worth trying to sand it down and redo at this moment. If I decide to do some future work to it, then maybe this is a candidate area to do that. And then last but not least, on the right hand aft, there's a little bit of a run and then, you know, a little bit of a run here along this edge. So those surfaces are not super easy to spray because we were spraying, you know, top down, and then we got a little bit too much material buildup and it just slumped off the side.